Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have an excellent Wednesday, everyone, but pay close attention because the Steelers are just one day away from their preseason opener, but before the first whistle against the Packers, there is already a major storyline developing in Pittsburgh that deserves much more attention. The competition inside the wide receiver room is not going the way many people expected. Coming into training camp, it would have been easy to assume that rookie Jeremy Bernard would immediately take over the number 3 wide receiver role and push Roman Wilson into the background. But that has not happened. In fact, Roman Wilson has responded in a way that could completely change the conversation surrounding this position group. Wilson has looked confident, athletic, and much more comfortable throughout camp, particularly when working from the slot. His quickness and acceleration have stood out, but perhaps the biggest difference has been what is happening between the ears. There have been fewer miscommunications and fewer mental mistakes, and when something does go wrong, Wilson has shown the ability to correct it instead of repeating the same mistake. That matters because confidence and trust are extremely important in an offense built around timing and detail. Aaron Rodgers has noticed the difference, and Wilson himself has talked about feeling more like himself. After what had been a difficult beginning to his career, this training camp represents something of a clean slate for him. The coaching change is also an important part of the story, with Mike McCarthy and his staff evaluating Wilson without the same history that existed under the previous coaching staff. Wilson has had an opportunity to establish himself again, and so far he has taken advantage of it. He has reportedly been one of the most frequently targeted players in camp because he keeps finding ways to get open, but that does not mean Jeremy Bernard has disappointed. Quite the opposite. The rookie has shown why the Steelers are excited about his potential. Bernard has been working inside and outside, lining up at X, Z, and Y receiver positions while learning a large portion of Mike McCarthy's offense. That is a lot to ask from a rookie, especially in an offense where the smallest details can determine whether a play works or fails. And this is where Bernard has impressed. He has shown strong hands, good acceleration, and an ability to understand the concepts he is being asked to run. More importantly, he appears to understand the small details that Aaron Rodgers needs from his receivers. Route depth, alignment, timing, splits, assignments, and adjustments all matter in this offense. Bernard has demonstrated an ability to absorb those details while continuing to show his physical ability. He is still thinking at times, and that can slow a rookie down. But the encouraging part is that he does not appear lost. He understands what he is being taught. He can explain the differences between what he learned in college and what he is learning now, and he is willing to ask questions and absorb advice. Bernard himself described the offense as very detail-oriented and explained that he has been focused on studying the plays, knowing his assignments, and asking as many questions as possible. That mentality could become one of the biggest reasons he earns the trust of the coaching staff and quarterback. And there is another part of his game that could become extremely important: versatility. Bernard has experience lining up in different places, and he understands that being able to perform multiple jobs can create more opportunities. If the Steelers need him outside, he can play outside. If they need him inside, he can move inside. If they need him to block, he has shown a willingness to do that as well. That last part should not be overlooked. In this offense, being a wide receiver is not simply about catching passes. A receiver has to understand his role on every play. Sometimes the job is to make the big catch. Sometimes the job is to clear space for someone else. Sometimes the job is to block. Bernard has shown that he is willing to embrace all of those responsibilities. That could be especially important because he is competing for opportunities alongside established weapons such as DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr., while Pat Freiermuth gives Aaron Rodgers another receiving option at tight end. There are also running backs capable of contributing in the passing game, so Bernard is not walking into a situation where targets are simply waiting for him. He has to earn them, and so far the impression is that he understands that. One comparison discussed during camp was to Robert Woods during his prime with the Rams, a player who was not necessarily the flashiest person on the field, but was extremely detailed, physical, dependable, and valuable in every aspect of the offense. That is the kind of profile Bernard is beginning to show. At the same time, Roman Wilson is giving the Steelers something they desperately need from him: consistency. This is why the battle between Wilson and Bernard is so interesting. It is not simply a competition between a veteran young young player trying to revive his career and a rookie trying to make his mark. It is a competition between two players who are showing different strengths and forcing the Steelers to take a closer look at how they want to use them. And there is another receiver making this competition even more interesting, Brandon Smith. Smith has reportedly been one of the most consistent depth receivers throughout camp. His hands, size, speed, catch radius, and ability to make difficult catches have stood out. He has worked both inside and outside and has also contributed on special teams. That combination could be extremely important when the roster decisions arrive. If Smith continues performing at this level, the Steelers may have to make a difficult decision about how many wide receivers they want to keep. At minimum, he has positioned himself as a serious practice squad candidate, and the possibility of forcing his way onto the active roster cannot be ignored. There is also Eli Heidenreich, another player showing why versatility can matter so much during a roster battle. After missing some practices, Heidenreich returned and showed impressive work in special teams and pass protection. What stood out was not simply his athletic ability, but his understanding of where he needed to be. That is exactly the kind of detail that can help a 7th round pick fight for a roster spot. But while the offense is giving fans plenty to watch, the defense may have an even more fascinating development happening behind the scenes. Patrick Graham is not simply moving the Steelers' outside linebackers from one side of the formation to the other. He is creating disguises and moving them into different positions across the defensive front. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, and Jack Sawyer give Pittsburgh a deep and talented group of outside linebackers, and Graham appears determined to find creative ways to use those players. Sometimes both outside linebackers can line up on the edges. Sometimes one can move inside. In nickel situations, they can be shifted again. The purpose is simple. Make the quarterback work harder before the snap and make protection decisions more difficult. If the offense cannot identify where the pressure is coming from, one mistake in the protection chain can create a free rusher, but Graham is not relying only on free runners. He also wants to create one-on-one opportunities. Moving Nick Herbig or Alex Highsmith around can force an offensive lineman into a difficult matchup. It can also create opportunities for players such as Cam Heyward or other members of the defensive front to attack isolated blockers. That is what makes this defensive approach so interesting. The disguise is not the final goal. The disguise is designed to create the matchup the Steelers want. However, there is one major warning. All of this movement only works if the defense maintains discipline. Graham has emphasized that the scheme is still a work in progress. Not everything being tested during training camp will necessarily make it to week 1. There is trial and error involved, and the players have to prove that they can handle everything being asked of them. Against the run, the Steelers still have to maintain their responsibilities and their gaps. It does not matter how creative the alignment looks if someone misses his assignment and opens a running lane. That balance between disguise and discipline could become one of the defining stories of this defense. And with the preseason opener against the Packers arriving, there is another important reality Steelers fans need to understand. They are probably not going to see the full defensive package. Aaron Rodgers explained that preseason games are based on very basic installations compared with what the team works through during training camp. For him, one of the most important evaluations is whether players can remember what they learned several days earlier, execute their assignments, maintain their alignments, and apply coaching points when the play becomes live. That means the first preseason game may not reveal everything the Steelers are planning to do, but it can still reveal who is ready. For the wide receivers, this game could provide another opportunity for Roman Wilson, Jeremy Bernard, Brandon Smith, and the rest of the room to show that their training camp progress is real. For the defense, it will be about executing the basics before Graham unleashes more of the disguises and movement that have made this training camp so intriguing. So now the question for Steelers Nation is simple. After everything we have seen from Roman Wilson, Jeremy Bernard, Brandon Smith, and this new look Patrick Graham defense, who do you believe has made the biggest statement during training camp so far? But there is an even bigger reason why this preseason game matters, and it has very little to do with the final score. For the Steelers, this is about finding out which players can take everything they have learned during training camp and carry it into a live football environment. That is especially important for a young wide receiver room that is being asked to operate inside an offense where timing, communication, alignment, and execution are critical. Aaron Rodgers made that point very clearly when discussing what he believes teams should evaluate during the preseason. In his view, the practices themselves can actually tell coaches more than the preseason games, because training camp involves much more of the complete offensive installation. Players are expected to remember things from several days earlier, recall coaching points, know their alignment, assignment, understand their assignment, and execute it immediately. That is a massive challenge for Jeremy Bernard. Think about what is being asked of this rookie. He is not simply learning a handful of routes and waiting for the ball. He is moving around the formation, learning different receiver positions, understanding different depths, and adjusting to the terminology and details of a completely new offensive system. And yet, one of the most encouraging things about Bernard is that he does not appear overwhelmed by it. He has been able to explain what he recognizes from his college experience and what is different in Pittsburgh. Sometimes the play itself may be familiar, but the terminology is different. The depth may be different. The way the quarterback wants the route executed may be different. Those small differences can completely change the result of a play. That is why his ability to learn could be just as important as his athletic ability. A receiver can have excellent speed and strong hands, but if he is in the wrong place at the wrong time, the quarterback cannot trust him. In this offense, that becomes even more important because there are option routes and choice routes, along with different adjustments